I'm going to fix your creative fatigue problem once and for all. There's a lot of people out there screaming creative fatigue, but I'm gonna tell you there's sometimes it's a big difference and there's sometimes it's not a big. And frankly, the people that are on this bandwagon is they frankly just haven't managed enough money to tell you whether it's a problem or not. But I'm gonna set the record straight. So how do I know this? Well, I'm one of the partners at Ryko Digital. We are a large e-commerce agency. We have 15 pods that manage advertising over 5 years. So I'm gonna tell you the times it's important and not important. So what is creative fatigue? Creative fatigue is when the same people you've been advertising to have seen the same creative over a long period of time and it actually stops being effective. It's a really broad term. That's because that's what creative fatigue is. So for example, we all know the frustration, let's say every election time, when every time you open up your app, whether that's TikTok or Instagram, it's all about election this, election that, this viewpoint, that viewpoint. And you know that feeling you get when you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm so tired of seeing this? That's really what creative fatigue is, right? There's no great statistic on 1 time or 3 times or 5 times frequency. It's not really true. Let me tell you when it is a big deal. From my experience across the millions of spend that we have managed, creative fatigue becomes a problem when you're pushing big budgets over a long period of time, or when you are targeting a small audience, probably 1 million people or less. So for us, we buy into the philosophy of we go very broad with our targeting. So what that means is typically the broader the audience, the less you have to be concerned about creative fatigue. But the smaller the audience, then you do have to be concerned about creative fatigue. For example, it's like showing the same image to 30,000 people versus 300 million people. You see the difference? It's gonna burn through, it's gonna reach that people much faster. But if you are advertising with a small budget, let's call it 20K a month or less, and your audiences you're targeting are generally big, several millions, or completely broad, you don't even have to be concerned about creative fatigue. It's when you're pushing big budgets over a long period of time, does it become a big problem? Let me show you an example. This is a real brand that we've been working with for a long time. We spent a lot of money on this brand. We go very broad audiences with this brand. As you can see, yes, frequencies are big, but that's with a 35 million pool, 24 million, 17 million. And over the course of just a year, we've reached 207 million people. When you're going big like this, you don't have to care about creative fatigue that much. Now, I'm gonna tell you some ways to combat it, but really, if you're not advertising big budgets over a long period of time, it's not gonna make a big difference unless you are targeting small groups of people. For example, just the cost per purchase, which is a gauge we use to see the effectiveness of the advertising. Anyone who looks at this chart can say that it's held relatively constant. Yes, there's been certain points in time where it has spiked, but that may not have been due to the creative. It may have been due to other factors, which I can make a different video on that. But you can see that creative fatigue, using this method that we do to aggressively scale brands, it's not that big of a deal. If you think you have a creative fatigue problem, the only way to combat that is creative diversity. Now, I am a big proponent in creative diversity because one of my partners, D, was just speaking at a Meta event a few months ago, and their engineers actually said at that event how important creative diversity is for your cost regulation, keeping costs down, to get better performance. I do buy into that. That is important. So what we're doing with our brands all the time is we're on a 2-week cycle of always making fresh creative. Now that creative is very different. It's different assets, different ways of positioning the same offer, positioning the same mass desire. It's even different creative types. Creative diversity is a big deal. Because just like any normal human, if you saw one thing on Facebook and one thing on TikTok, if you see the exact same video in the exact same way again, you're just gonna scroll past it because your brain's gonna say, oh, I've already seen that. If you see a different way of talking about, a different way of showing it, it's gonna grab your attention. Just like a TikTok trend or an Instagram trend. Yes, you keep watching it because different people are doing it different ways. It's the same thing, but they're doing it differently. Same concept. So creative fatigue, you really only have to worry about it, in my opinion, after the millions and millions that we have spent for our brands, is if you're spending big budgets over a long period of time. That's because we go very broad with our targeting. But if you are going very micro in your targeting, you do have to be concerned about it. So what I would recommend is if you see your performance degrading over time on an ad or audience targeting that had historically been performing well, that is a sign you need to inject fresh creative. But it's important, don't make the creative look similar. You have to make it look very different, drastically different. That's what I mean by creative diversity. It has to look drastically different. So if you're doing a video, can you do a static but different colors and aesthetics? If you have one model, can you do a second model that looks very different? If you are doing it from a point of view, can you change it up and do a green screen over it? Or can you make it look like a listicle or an article? That's what I mean. So like even the examples right here, we're talking about the same product and even the same ways of communicating it, but the creative is all going to look very different. And so that's what we mean by creative diversity, is you have to make it look very different. So if you feel like creative fatigue is a problem, ask yourself, how big am I targeting the audience? If it's broad, it's not going to be an issue unless you're spending several six figures a month over a long period of time. Number two, do I have the creative diversity? Do I have the same concept or offer or mass desire I'm advertising to, but am I doing it in many different ways and creative formats? Is it a static, a video, a GIF? And am I showing it in creative different ways and even different models? So that's what I mean by that. So if you feel like you have a creative fatigue problem, let me know. DM me. My Instagram and my Twitter is linked below. My email address and a way to connect with me is also linked below. If you found this helpful, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe.